Hi, I'm Mark Hoth and welcome to Swift Almanac. Today is a really exciting lesson and we're going to cover a lot of ground. Firstly, we need to read and write data to Firebase so that we have some information to display in our app. Secondly, we want to display that information in a collection view, and we're going to add some headers and variable length cells, so watch closely on how to do that. Finally, we're going to create a user interface item called a HyperLink, which will be a subclass of a UILabel. It's going to have an automatic tap gesture recognizer attached, so if we click it, we will open the associated URL. Let's have a look and learn some stuff. Okay, so here is our information page, and this is what it's going to look like and how it's going to be displayed. We've got the date that the news or the information was released. We've got the name. In this case, it's a YouTube tutorial. So every time a YouTube comes out, it's going to update this information. So YouTube tutorial here with the title, and then the description of what's sort of, you know, what's that YouTube's about. So that's what we're going to do. This is a collection view. And if we look at Firebase, what we've got here, we've got an info branch for information, and then for each record in the branch, we've got the date, which is displayed up here. We've got the description, which is this smaller text at the bottom, and we've got the text, which is the I won't call it the header, but I'll call it the title. And then we have this URL link, and this is a URL link to the YouTube. And if we click on the app, it takes us to YouTube. So that's basically what we're looking to do. So that's what our database looks like, and essentially it's really difficult in Firebase to copy and paste. You can sort of add stuff by, oops, didn't want to do that. Yes, you can sort of add things, but because of the way I've done it here with Create Auto ID, it's very difficult to add what's essentially an array item, and you can't copy and paste. There's no copy and paste functionality. So we basically need to do this all in code. So what I did, if we go to our source code, oh, that's a simulator. Okay, so what I did is in information, I've got just this save information method as part of the part of our Firebase section, and well, I've got return at the front because I don't want to run it anymore. I've created the two information sessions that I wanted to have, but essentially what I can do is I can run this, 50 times, and that will create 50 records here. And then essentially what I can do is I can just edit all of these records, and what I can do is I can put a date far into the future, and then I can only display news that has a date that's prior to the current date. So that's basically how I'm fudging, or how I intend on fudging this this series of the database. So basically, it's pretty simple to write information to Firebase. We've got this DB reference, which we get as part of our initialization. This is a global variable, and it's a reference to our database in Firebase. And then we just go through our children. So we want to be in dbref.child.info, and then there's this child by auto ID. So essentially what that does is it creates an incremental automatic identifier, and as you can see, it looks like it's random figures, but it actually does get progressively larger, and it's guaranteed that that one will always be larger, I don't know, after the event of the previous one. So it creates these, child by auto ID creates this number, and then essentially we just pass a dictionary, the date, and the string. So this has to be a string, and this can be anything. Now I've converted all the dates. There's no date functions in Firebase. So I'm just using strings, but it also handles numbers and location coordinates and the like. But it doesn't do dates. You can convert it to intervals and all kinds of things, but I'm just using a string. When you're handling dates, I find it incredibly confusing. I just use strings and do conversions. I find that the easiest way to handle it. I can read it that way. I can see what I'm dealing with rather than some number of ticks since 1970 or 2001 or whatever it might be. So, so essentially, that's my data. It's a string any, and then we just call set value. Now, if info doesn't exist, then it will create it automatically. There's no type checking in NoSQL databases. If I want to add another field, I can manually add it here if I wanted to. I don't know, I could call something extra text, and this is more info. So that'll create an extra field, and you can just add things dynamically as and when it's needed. So that's how I've created data. How do I get it back? Well, I've got a load information function, and what I do is I request my DB reference and my child information, and then I want to get a one-off copy, observe a single event for the value of everything that's under .info, and that returns as a snapshot. So what I might do here is just run this. I don't want to create any more data. Okay, so we've got our data back, and if we print out value, it shows us that we've got this, what's essentially an array. We've got 2 items, and then each item contains data, description, text, and URL. So what we need to do is for each item in this value section, we want to get the items.value. So we'll just go down to here. Okay, so here's our 2 key value pairs, 1, 2 in our dictionary, and then the first key is this value, and then the it gets a bit confusing. The first key is this item for that first item in the array, and then the value is actually another dictionary. Now this is like, the first one is a string, and the second one is any. And any in this case is going to be a dictionary. So what we do is we say we want the first item, which is this one, and then we want to create a dictionary with the item.value, which is all of this information, and then essentially we want to get all that information out of the dictionary, and it'll iterate through, in this case, twice. The next time I'll go down to the second item here, and then it will do the same thing. It will get a dictionary out of the value, which will take this information here, and then for each item it will take out the date, text, description, and URL. So let's see if we can't. Okay, so now we've got this dictionary value. Let's have a look at our. So this dictionary value, as I said, has 4 items: text, description, URL, and date, and the associated things. And then we just go let date equals dictionary date as a string, and we have this. If there's nothing there, then we'll make it an empty string. so we don't have massive problems. And then once we've got those 4 local variables, we send it to my info shared set properties. And if we look at my info, essentially I've just got this data structure for each information item, and we've got an empty array here, and all set property does is call the initializer for info items and appends that item to our list. Now the app isn't making any changes to the data. We're only loading it once, and we're not worrying about things like once I update it, at least not right now. We will be doing notifications sometime in the future. So we can skip through all this, and it draws everything. So that's how reading and writing to Firebase is working. I hope that is relatively clear. Now, the other thing that I didn't mention in the introduction is I've created a splash screen, and you would have seen it when the app started. So I've got basically this splash screen view controller, and it's the first thing that gets called at the very beginning. Whereabouts is it? Moves to the splash screen, which just takes us to the splash screen view controller, and everything goes through my Firebase add user listener. And so when we start up the app, we're going to go to the splash screen, and then we have 2 options. Okay, the first option is where we go to the login screen. So we show the splash screen, and then well, I'll just show you this. If we're in App Delegate, the first thing we do is we move to the splash screen. Okay, so that's the very first line of code that's going to get called by our application under did finish launching with options. So the splash screen is being displayed, and then we're doing the configuration and adding the user listener. So we're trying to find out whether or not we're already logged in or not. So the two alternatives are we're logged out, in which case we want to display the login screen, and essentially that's going to be, we're going to figure that out really quickly, but we've added a 3-second asynchronous delay so that we see the splash screen for 3 seconds, and then we display the login window. So nothing wrong with doing that. Now, if we're logged in, you may recall in either the last or the YouTube tutorial before, I told you if you're really quick and clicked on like source, all of these would be empty because this load information was taking too long. So, and I said I'd fix that in a later tutorial, and that's what I've done, but I've fixed it in a terrible way, because this is what's basically called a race condition. And what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to wait until all of that data comes through, and then once all that data has come through, then you should move to the main window, right? Because we have all the information. So, and the main window is really this tab bar controller, right? But what I've done is I've just simply put in a 3-second delay, which means that as we're loading all of this information, if it took more than 3 seconds, well, we could still get to a point where we could, click here and none of this data would be displayed. So this is a really bad way of doing it, but it's also very convenient, because all of these loading, load access token, load current user, load information, and there's going to be more. There's going to be load training courses and all the rest of it. All of that information, and in the future we're going to have to check with GitHub to see if these things are set or not, and all the rest of it. Every one of them has to be complete. So we basically need to set up a dispatch group and run all of these items as part of the group And when all of those items complete, and of course they're all working asynchronously, so once all of those asynchronous things complete, then we should call move to main window. Now I will get to that later on, but in the meantime, I'm just taking this shortcut. Don't do this in a production environment, because eventually you will get caught out, right? It works, but it only works because everything here completes within 3 seconds. If one of these websites was down, for instance, well, the app's going to fail anyway, but even if it wasn't, but if, you know, maybe it's restarting or something like that, the timeout for the network is going to be more than 3 seconds, and so this is going to fail. Okay, so anyway, I have fixed the race condition for the time being. I haven't really fixed it, I've patched it, let's say, but I just thought I'd bring that to your attention. Now, the other thing I'm going to bring to your attention is that in earlier tutorials, I wasn't following a Swift convention, which was method names begin with a lowercase letter, and so I apologize for that, because I really should be following that Swift convention, but to explain why, I was a C developer for 5 to 7 years, and C functions, well, at least when I was developing, started with capital letters. So I'm just in a really, really bad habit of calling functions or methods with capital letters. It's taken me a while to readapt. I'm sure you'll find that as you go through your career, there'll be more programming languages out there, and they'll have different names for different things. You'll notice that I typically call these functions, even though they're methods. And of course, they are prepended with a function, not a meth keyword. But that's because in C there are no methods, because it's not object orientated. So quite often I use language which just shows you my age and the history of my programming. So please just be aware that I don't know, that some of these things I use interchangeably, and that's the reason why. Okay. So, and like the other thing that I have done is in the last lesson we converted source and projects to table views, and you may also hear me call those list views, because that's what they were called under the Mac OS some 25 years ago. But in these table views, I've renamed them so that they're called source table view controller, and I've renamed the source code so that even though it says view controllers, I've included collection view controllers and source table view controllers. Before it just said source view controller. And of course that means in our main tab bar controller, when we are setting up our 5 views for these 5 tabs, I've had to rename to source table view controller and training view controller and projects table view controller, messages view controller. And the one we're about to do now is the info collection view controller, which needs to take as a parameter a collection view layout, and we just pass one as a parameter. So that sets us up for our information collection view. And like table views, our collection view needs to have a cell, and as you can see here, we have a header as part of our cell. So we actually have 2 things in our info collection view cell. We have the cell, which contains this label, although it's actually a hyperlink. If you click on it, the idea is it takes you to the YouTube. You know, you can watch it on your phone or your iPad, and then it's got this description, which is this text down the bottom, and we just do what we normally do. We set up the views and we set up the constraints. Now, for all intents and purposes, this hyperlink is a UILabel. In fact, we'll look at the extension that I've created. We'll look at the hyperlink now. It's really straightforward. If you think about what a hyperlink is, I know this one's not underlined and it's not in blue, but essentially it's a label that you can click on. And so and when you click on it, it goes to a URL. So a hyperlink has to have this property of a URL. Now I've created it as a string because I'm storing them in the Firebase database as a string. There's no %20s in spaces and all that kind of stuff. So it's a string, and when we initialize our hyperlink, you see it's a subclass of UILabel. So when we initialize it, we want to have a tap gesture recognizer. This is a UIKit feature, so that when the mouse clicks on a label or anything that the tap gesture recognizer is attached to, could be text or, well, essentially it's a button. And what you need to do is you need to set is user interaction enabled. So when you click on this, do you want the operating system to send messages to the item? And that has to be set to true by default for a label. If you click on a label, well, nothing happens, right? So the is user interaction enabled by default is set to false. So we set it to true, and then we simply add the gesture recognizer. So that really should be, well, can be self.add gesture recognizer. It's still the same thing. I only use self within closures, or like in this situation here, where I have got a local variable as well as a property with the same name. So this required init is just required, so we had to put it in, and then when the operating system detects a tap gesture or a click on this label, then it calls this selector, and our hyperlink selector just looks at this URL property, converts it to a URL from a string. Currently it prints it out just so I could test it. I'll get rid of that. And then it simply calls UI application.shared.open the URL with an empty dictionary for options and no completion handler, and that will send our channel app off to, I'm not sure, does it go to YouTube directly, or does it go to, no, it's going to, there you go. Okay, it's going off to Safari, which is then embedding YouTube. So that's basically how our hyperlink works. And so let's go back to our cells. So we've got the two cells, and what we're doing is we add a subview for both of them, our text label and our description label. And what we want to do is we want to center the top label, which we've done, and we want to give that a bold system font. You can see that it's bold, of size 17, so it's larger. And then for our description label, which is this smaller text, we want this to be left justified. I've just given it a number of lines equal to 5, but it recalculates that. And it detects the line breaking by word wrapping. There's various different ways you can do it. You can do it by character, etc. But word wrapping is the most intelligent way of doing it, so it's still readable. And then we set the system font equal to size 12. It's just a regular font, and it's smaller, which allows us to do everything. Then we've got some constraints now in our source ones. Well, the constraints were pretty straightforward. But here we've got 2 items, and so we need to figure out what we're going to do. So in the text label, we've just got left, top, right, and height. So we've got the height set to 22, and for our description, we've got the left, top, right, and bottom. Now the bottom is just set to the bottom of the cell view, but the top is set to the text label bottom +1. So it's just like the bottom of the text label here, and then just one item down gives us the top of the description label. So that's our constraints. Now the other thing we've got is, well, we might just go back to our collection view controller and have a look what we need to do. So you might recall, if you looked at my collection view tutorials, we need to register the cell. So we've got our info collection view cell, and we've got a cell reuse identifier here called our info cell. And well, you can see here we've also registered a header cell. So even though they're all part of the same cell, they have separate views, and so they need to be registered and reusable. So in terms of our collection view, the cell for item at is pretty much the same as what you'd normally expect. You've got the cell background color is white, and what we're doing is every time we go through the cell, what we need to do is we need to say, hey, we need to set the URL, we need to set the text, and we need to set the description, and that is in our singleton my information that is there. So that's all what we need to do to display it. However, there are some differences. So the first difference that we're going to come across is normally what we do is we say how many sections are we. Say there's one section, and how many items in the section are we. Say, well, that's the info items.count, that's the number. And then down here in this index path, we have index path.row, and that allows us to put the right information in the right cells. But for this, because we're using headers, what I've done is I've swapped these around. So, and the reason for that is if you just have one section, you get a header for each section, right? So if you only have one section, then you get one header, and then you'll get all these other cells, but you won't get any more headers. So what we need to do is we say, hey, there's one item in each section, which is our info item, and so and how many sections are there? That's the number of info items. So that means we're going to get one header for each section. So when we get down here, this collection view, and we're talking about putting information into the cell, this is the first cell, the second cell, etc. We need to go by the section value, not the row value. So that's just explaining why that occurs. And then the next thing we need to do is we need to calculate the height of these cells, and we do that in the collection view layout. And again, we're using the index path.section, and if you looked at my, if you saw my request that was made by one of, I believe, Indian friends, made a request about collection views and drawing Facebook, we need to have a dynamic height for the cell. And so what we need to do is we need to calculate the height based on this text height as well as this description height, and then I've added a buffer of 8 pixels for the top and the bottom, and that returns this variable amount. So I've got these two methods here, the text height and the description height. They basically do the exact same thing, but in the text height, all we do is we create a label, we set it to the size of the text that we're writing, which is bold 17. We clip the bounds. I'm pretty sure we might not even need that line. And then, but what we definitely need to know is we need to populate it with some text, and we need to resize the label to the size to fit. Now that resizing is going to give us the height of the label, which we can then return. Now it's not going to draw the label because we haven't added a subview. It's just created an invisible label just in memory, but it still recalculates it so that we can figure out how high this label would be. Now, the same with the description height. The description is a little bit more trickier though, because well, we set the justification, but we need to set how many lines it is. We need to set this line breaking so that it recalculates everything. Obviously, we need to populate it with the text and size it to fit. And then that's going to also return the height, but it's going to calculate the height as a dynamic length. Like this first one is always going to be one line. It's always going to return the same value unless we resize the text, right? But this second one, depending on how much text we have here, it could be no lines, it could be 3 lines, it could be 5 lines, it could be anything between 0 and 5 lines. So it dynamically calculates the height of that cell. Now the other thing that we need to look at is our header. And CollectionView is a little bit tricky. They have this a view for a supplementary element of kind, and so the kinds are header and footer basically, but you could create multiple headers or multiple footers if you so desired, but essentially it works a similar way to the reuse identifier for the cell, but we need to switch on, but it's got this kind value because the cell is always this text. There's always sort of one of them. It's not really that tricky, but this kind sort of property means that there could be multiple different kinds. So we need to have this switch statement based on what this kind is, and the kind that we've got here at the moment is a UI collection element kind section header, which is a mouthful, but then it pretty much follows the same sort of source. The header view is equal to collection view DQ, blah, 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 the kind, the reuse identifier, give me the index path, and return it as our custom collection reusable view. Now I'll come back to that in a second, but basically what we do is the header's got a label. We want to set the header text equal to the date, and we just want to basically set everything up so that our text alignment is left, our color is white, it's got a light grey background, and basically it'll draw that automatically for us. It returns the header view, and as you can see, fatal error, this should not happen. Now, one thing that you do need to do as part of this collection view for a header, you need to do two things. You need to have this DQ reusable thing happening so it can be reused, and you also need to where is it? Here it is here. You need to set the reference size for the header in the section, so basically it's going to be as wide as the view, and you need to set a height for it, and I've set it to be 25 pixels. So that is that. Then the other thing you need to do is at the very start, just like you need to register cells, you need to register the header. And again, it's got a sort of different type thing. You've got this your custom collection reusable view, which is I've saved the info collection view cell. It's with my other cell. And then the for supplementary view of kind, you need to pass this UI collection element kind section header. There's another one if you want to have a footer. There's another kind called UI collection element kind section footer, and of course there's a reuse identifier which we've got as a global at the top, and we just call info header. So if you, for instance, if you did want to use a footer section footer, then down in this collection view for supplementary element of kind string, you would have a separate case where you would have UI collection element kind section footer, which would then implement all this for footer information. Okay, so what does that all look like? If we look at we've got our info collection view cell, which is our UI collection view cell, and then we've got another custom collection reusable view, and look, it's just got a label, which is our label just there. It follows, because we're doing this in code, it does the override init, and we call our setup view and constraints like we normally do. There's really nothing to do. We just add the sub view so it's being displayed, and we set up our constants, and that's basically it. We set up our constraints, and that's basically it. Now I just wanted to check. yes, I don't need. Yes, I was trying to figure out how I was going to add the URL to the cell, and I don't actually need that function because what I did is I created the hyperlink subclass, and so I can just set the URL as part of the creation process when we call cell for item at. So that's, look, I reckon that's super exciting. We haven't covered headers before. We haven't really covered dynamic cell heights, and we've created a hyperlink. We've subclassed UILabel and created this hyperlink. We like to think it's pretty nifty. So what I'm going to do is I am going to, in the background, I'm going to do the exact same as we did on info in training, and then the next lesson is going to be about uploading stuff to the App Store. So I hope you're learning heaps. I don't know about you, but I'm getting excited. The app is almost ready for an alpha release into the App Store. My paid app documents with Apple have been approved. So next lesson, we'll be looking at the App Store, payments, etc., how to build apps for testing and release. You must have learned something, so click like, and in any event, subscribe to the channel to see our fully functional app developed to the App Store. Look forward to seeing you soon. Cheers.